Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect. All right, well, welcome to the teacher evaluation training. I'm glad you guys were able to join me. As I said to yesterday's crew, I want to apologize in advance that we had to do this again online this year. I'd really hoped that we were going to be able to do this in person. Had some activities planned midway through that were going to allow us to watch some videos of teachers teaching and collaborate with each other on the scoring of those and work on building some inter-rater reliability across the district. But with having to move this online, we decided it was best to not try to pull that activity off this year, but hopefully we'll be able to do that next year. With that, we're going to jump right in. If you guys have questions throughout the presentation, don't hesitate to raise your hand and I'll call on you, or you can type your question in the chat box. So let's go ahead and get going. This is just a quick overview of what we plan on covering today. We're going to be reviewing the different contract types and what you need to know about each of those contract types. We're going to review the observation and evaluation documents and what's required. We're going to do an overview of Winocular and how to assign smart forms, and Tony Day is going to walk you through that process today. And then we're going to cover progressive discipline, from warnings to letters of reprimand, and our due process rights and how we navigate due process. And then we're going to review the administrator HR site and resources, just as a reminder, and for those of you that are new to the district, to make sure you understand and know that we have that HR administrator site available to you, which is kind of a one-stop shop for everything HR. Oh, Tony just let me know that my screen share is not working. Let's try that again. Thank you, Tony. There we go. Now you can see it. This is just a quick overview of all of the different statutes and administrative rules that contribute to how we operate and how we conduct our evaluations in the state of Idaho. In addition to the statutes and the administrative rules listed there, our evaluations are also governed by board policy, the master contract, and the certified employee handbook. So there's a lot of pieces that contribute to how we conduct evaluations in the state of Idaho and in our district specifically. My job and my goal in this presentation is try to condense that all down for you in an easy to consume package, and that's what this presentation is all about. So let's kick off with the categories of contracts. The first category contract that we're going to talk about is a Category 1. These are issued to employees hired after August 1st or hired into one-year only positions. That would be typically to replace somebody that's out on a year leave of absence. We had a lot of these last year. This is a duration of 1 year only. The employee's contract expires at the end of that year. They have no property rights and no expectations of employment moving into the next year. What we do with this is in the spring, we generate a list of all of the Category 1 contract employees and generate a Category 1 contract letter that we issue to you, and then you make decisions about which Category 1 employees you're going to retain and which ones you are not going to retain. The ones that you're not going to retain, you issue them a letter, but they have an opportunity to apply for in-district transfers to other open positions throughout the district, and in many cases, they often do get picked up. A lot of times, the Category 1 contracts that you're not keeping are simply because you don't have a place to keep them because you've got a teacher returning or something of that nature. So a lot of times, they're able to pick up a job in another school, which is great. In the event of a mid-year termination on a Category 1 employee, they do have the right to probation and a formal board hearing. If this is a performance issue and you're looking to terminate mid-year, we would have to go through that probationary period, and we would have to have a formal board hearing for a mid-year term. Category 2 employees, these are employees starting their first or second year of continuous service in the same district. So these are new employees that are hired before August 1st. So Category 2 employee, if they're hired before August 1st, they'd be placed on a Category 1 if they're hired after August 1st. if the employee is in their second year of service, they're also placed on a Category 2 contract. And there are no property rights attached to this contract, similar to the Category 1. But what we do require is, if you're not going to renew these individuals at the end of the year and not bring them back for another year, you do need to mark them as unsatisfactory on their evaluation. So you need to have cause for not renewing them. So they must be marked unsatisfactory on the evaluation, and then you would work with me to generate a Category 2 non-renewal letter. And that needs to be, we really have a goal of issuing those letters prior to May 15th. That's not driven by statute, that's driven by our own procedures. And it's in an effort to make sure that they have an opportunity to go look for employment elsewhere. We don't want to hold off on this so long that they're not able to secure a job in another district. And so we do shoot for that May 15th deadline, although statutorily we have until July 1st to let them know that we're not renewing them. Again, just like the Category 1s, if we're in a position where we're needing to terminate mid-year for unsatisfactory performance, they do have a right to that probation and that formal board hearing, just like we talked about with the Category 1 employees. Category 3, these are employees starting their third year of continuous service in our district, or if they're coming to us from another district where they were on a continuing contract status, we can place them on a Category 3 for 3 years. So in our district, we call those 3A, 3B, and 3C contracts. And basically, they were on a continuing contract in one district. They come to us, we place them on a Category 3. They're going to be on a Category 3 for 3 years before they hit continuing contract status. And then with your Category 3s in the Boise School District, we give them a little more property rights than what statutorily they are typically granted in other districts. They do have a right, if we're going to not renew them for unsatisfactory performance, they have a right to that 6-week intensive staff development period, then an 8-week probationary period, and then they are entitled to that formal board hearing if we're going to move forward with termination. So if you put them on intensive staff development, that 6-week period goes by and they haven't shown improvement, then you would move to probationary period for 8 weeks. If they still haven't shown improvement, then they would move to a termination hearing in front of the board. If they show improvement at any point along that process, we remove them from this intensive staff development, or we remove them probation at the end of that time period. But if they haven't shown improvement, then we proceed to the next step. So that's important to keep in mind. Renewable contract, these are folks that are starting their 4th year of continuous service in the same district or in our district. They have full property rights under state law, and similar to what we've granted our Category 3, they have a right to that 6-week intensive staff development. They have the right to the 8-week probationary period, and then they have the right to the formal hearing before the board if we're going to terminate or non-renew for unsatisfactory performance. So it's important to keep in mind, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, the timeline of what that looks like when it comes to, if we're not going to renew somebody, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then a board hearing, that takes time. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but wanted to give you a heads up. So let's talk a little bit about the evaluations and what is required and why. So state law requires that there is a minimum of 1 written evaluation in each of the annual contract years of employment, and it has to be completed before June 1st each year. For those of you that have been in the business for a long time, you remember the old days when Category 1 contract employees did not have to be evaluated. That's long since gone away. Every certified employee has to be evaluated once annually now. Evaluations have to include, by state law, 2 documented observations, one of which must be completed before January 1st of each year. So what does that look like in practice? So in practice in our district, at a minimum, you have to complete 1 written observation using our district's observation form in monocular, and you have to complete that before January 1st. Now, we go off on winter holiday break around December 22nd, December 23rd typically. So really, because we are off on break after that until after January 1st, you really need that observation completed before we leave for the winter holiday break. So really, for us, that deadline is more like December 22nd, December 23rd, depending on the year. The other thing, the next thing that we have to do at minimum is complete a second formal observation that becomes part of the employee's formal evaluation. That's due again by June 1st. So that formal evaluation has to be completed by June 1st. Again, we go off contract, our teachers go off contract typically before Memorial Day. And so you really have to get that done before Memorial Day. You don't really have till June 1st to get that completed. And so again, January 1st and June 1st in our district really is more like December 22nd, December 23rd, and May 27th, 6th, whatever, depending on the year. Any questions about that timeline and those due dates? Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, in addition to what state law requires for evaluations, we have a lot of our evaluation that's dictated by the master contract and what's been negotiated between the Boise School District and the BEA over time. A couple of the things that you want to keep in mind: a pre-conference is not required, but it is encouraged. If you don't have pre-conference forms, I'd be happy to share some with you. I've got some samples that I could share with you from principals across the district, stuff that I used to use when I was a principal. Just don't hesitate to reach out. All formal evaluations or observations should be conducted openly and with full knowledge of the employee. So this means that you need to be giving, that you can't do any secretive evaluations or observations. You need to be giving them notice that you're going to be doing that evaluation or observation. The employee should be provided a copy of the district's observation document within 5 school days after the observation. So when you conduct your formal observation, you need to make sure that you are getting that form filled out and submitted to the employee within 5 school days of completing that observation, 5 days from being in that classroom. And then formal written evaluations require an observation period of 30 minutes. That's another thing that is required. So you need to be in that classroom for 30 minutes for that formal evaluation observation. The post-evaluation conference by master contract has to be held within 7 school days after the observation. So when you're completing your formal evaluation and you go in to do that 30-minute observation, after you complete that 30-minute observation, you need to have that evaluation sent to them in Winocular within 7 school days, unless there's mutual agreement to a later date. Now, I always encourage folks, if the teacher comes to you and says, hey, I need to postpone our post-conference because I've got a conflict, I always encourage you guys to get that in writing, just to make sure that you have something to document the fact that they've made that request. If you've made that request due to a conflict, I always encourage you again to get confirmation from the employee in writing that they are okay with postponing that date, okay? One of the things that we'll talk about here is that the contents of the evaluation is not grievable, but if we mess up procedurally, that is a grievable thing that the employee could submit a grievance about. So it's important that we really, really, really focus and adhere to our processes. The employee needs to be provided an electronic or paper copy of the evaluation within 5 days after the evaluation has been done. So similar to the observation, we have 5 days to get them the form, and then you have 7 days to schedule that post-conference. And then the employee has 21 days to attach a response to their evaluation. So they can basically file a rebuttal to the evaluation within 21 days. Again, the contents of the evaluation is not grievable, but if we mess up on the process, that is something that they could grieve. Any questions on that? Okay. This is just a quick reminder, because this was a change a few years ago. The special ed department has asked that, that principals complete the evaluations for school psychologists, SLPs, occupational and physical therapists. Those all need to be completed by the homeschool building principal or assistant principal. Now, those folks are usually spread over a number of schools, and so you may work with other principals to rotate those, but whoever the homeschool building principal is, you're responsible for making sure it gets done. So you need to coordinate with those other principals. You know, Melanie may complete it 1 year, Diana may complete it the next year, but you guys need to collaborate, and whoever the homeschool principal is the one that's responsible for making sure that collaboration takes place. because we are responsible as building principals to complete those annually, not the special ed supervisors. All right, moving on into a discussion about distinguished ratings and the career ladder. We're not going to dig into the career ladder extensively today. We've done that in the past, and I do have resources for you here. But as a reminder, during the 2020 legislative session, House Bill 523 was passed by the legislature, which added the advanced professional compensation rung, and that addition to the career ladder forced us to make a few changes that we're going to talk about. Again, I'm not going to dig in deep to the career ladder today. There is a career ladder guide that was actually developed by Jody Mills, who's now with us in our district. Welcome, Jody. Jody developed this when she was out in Caldwell, and we've shared this with you guys before. It's a great document that kind of gives you everything you need to know about the career ladder. And then there's also a career ladder PowerPoint there that is what I've shared with you guys in the past to kind of go over the important aspects of the career ladder. You're welcome to share that with your employees as well if they have questions about the career ladder. And Tony actually went through and made a few updates to that yesterday, reflecting some of the new changes that we're going to talk about today. All right, so as I mentioned, the adoption of the advanced professional compensation rung and the way the state was collecting data in response to that change resulted in us making a number of changes to our evaluation model last year. So this is all kind of just a reminder. This is not new stuff. This is a reminder from last year. But the big thing that we had to adjust was we had to add a distinguished rating to our evaluation instrument. Historically, the Boise School District had not had a distinguished rating, and there were a number of reasons why. That was basically what the Boise School District and the Boise Education Association had agreed that was not what we wanted our teachers focused on. We didn't want our teachers to be fixated on whether or not they were distinguished. We wanted them to be focused on improvement. And so we had purposefully left the distinguished rating out of our evaluation instrument. But with the advanced professional compensation rung or endorsement requiring that we rate teachers distinguished in either domains 2 or 3, we had to make an adjustment. The other big thing is that we needed to collect and report the actual percentage of students that made growth rather than just a yes or no. So we used to just collect, did 51% of your students show growth on the measure that you had selected, yes or no. With the addition of the advanced professional compensation rung, we needed to start collecting the actual percentage of students that showed growth, not just a yes or no. And then we also needed to start collecting whether an employee served in a leadership position or not. So that's something that we're going to talk about as well. Just as a reminder, to move from the professional compensation rung of the career ladder, so remember there's 3 rungs to the career ladder. There's the residency compensation rung, the professional compensation rung, and the advanced professional compensation rung. Those 3 rungs of the career ladder correspond with different levels of funding that come into the district to help pay salaries. And as a reminder, in our district, we have a locally negotiated salary schedule between the Boise Education Association and the district. Because of that, the career ladder really is just a funding mechanism for us. It's what brings the money into the district that we then allocate in salaries. And so it's important for our employees to understand that. And that's something that we typically have to explain to teachers when they come into our district from elsewhere, because a lot of districts do utilize the career ladder as their salary schedule. So oftentimes we need to help them understand that we have a locally negotiated salary schedule, and that where they're placed on the career ladder really is more about driving funding to the district. And it's still important that they move on the career ladder, because the more they move on the career ladder, the more money there is at the table when it comes time to negotiate salaries, which means there's more likelihood of larger increases that are able to be negotiated. Again, to move from the professional compensation rung to the advanced professional compensation rung, the employee has to be rated as distinguished overall in domains 2 or 3. This was the part that drove us adding the distinguished rating in the first place. We could have looked at just adding distinguished in domains 2 or 3, but when we reflected on it, we really felt like that would be confusing. So we made the decision to add the distinguished to all the domains and components and adopt the Danielson framework as it was written. So that's what we have done. We did that last year was our first year with that distinguished rating. This will be our second year. Last year, you'll recall that we gave you guys some guidance on how to grant that distinguished rating overall. And so we are actually going to revise that slightly based on feedback that we received not only from principals, but teachers. And just in hindsight, we've really been able to refine the way we look at granting those overall distinguished ratings. So the criteria for distinguished ratings, and this is new, so this is important. So if you haven't been listening to me before, make sure you listen now. If an employee is rated distinguished in a majority of the components within a domain, that domain would be rated as distinguished. That's not a change. That's how we operated last year. So remember, in the Danielson framework, you've got components. Those components are part of 4 different domains. So if you rate the employee as distinguished in a majority of the components within a domain, then that domain is rated as distinguished. Here's the adjustment we're making for this year. If an employee is rated as distinguished in 3 or more domains, they would be rated as distinguished on the overall evaluation unless they have received an unsatisfactory elsewhere in the evaluation, since one component marked as unsatisfactory on the evaluation shall result in an overall unsatisfactory evaluation or ranking. That's a lot. That latter part is not new. So we've always done, if they are unsatisfactory anywhere in the evaluation, they're unsatisfactory overall. What's new is last year we said if they're distinguished in domains 2 or 3, they're distinguished overall. A lot of people contact us and said that doesn't make sense. And the only reason we did that is because domain 2 and 3 were the ones that the state were really looking at. That's what the state cared about. We've adjusted this to say now, to be distinguished overall, you have to be distinguished in 3 of the 4 domains at a minimum. Okay, so that's the big change. Then keeping in mind that if they're unsatisfactory anywhere else in the evaluation, they can't be rated distinguished overall. And we're going to cover that multiple times in this presentation. So by the end, you're going to be tired of hearing me say it. A couple more clarifiers. If an employee does not submit evidence of student achievement, they would be rated as unsatisfactory in section 2. Again, we had situations in the past where teachers weren't submitting their student achievement, their growth in student achievement. Student achievement is a required component of the evaluation, and it's a standalone component of the evaluation in accordance with state law. So if they don't submit student achievement, you cannot give them a distinguished rating. You would have to rate them as unsatisfactory in that section 2, which would result in an unsatisfactory overall in the evaluation. If an employee does not submit a PLP, they would be rated as unsatisfactory in section 1, regardless of how many domains were rated as distinguished. The PLP is part of the evaluation. It's a required component. There are other factors that are supposed to be considered in the evaluation. We're going to talk about this a little later, but basically you can use parental input, student input, or a portfolio, and the PLP counts as the portfolio. That's what we use for that section 1 rating, for that additional measure. If a teacher doesn't submit that PLP, they can't be distinguished overall because they didn't do what is required in state law for the evaluation. Now, this is not a problem for 99% of our evaluations. Where we've seen this is when the employee is set to retire, they're choosing not to submit student achievement, or they're choosing not to submit their PLP. And what's happening is when we submit that information, they haven't submitted a PLP, they haven't submitted student achievement, and we go to upload that to the state, it's kicking out as an error because we've rated them distinguished, but yet they didn't submit those components that are required. And so we need to make sure that teachers are doing that. And so that's why we're putting this piece in place this year. And then just as a reminder, it goes without saying, but you're going to rate employees as distinguished based on your professional judgment, your past training, and all of the different experiences you've had. You're going to use that to make those determinations. Any questions on that? Because this is a lot right here on this slide. Like I said, we're going to reiterate a lot of this as I go throughout the presentation, but this is the first mention of it. Okay, let me know. Just as a reminder, we added that distinguished rating again. For those of you that have been around, this used to be a NA category, not applicable category, and we removed the not applicable category again due to state reporting when principals were marking not NA or not observed. It was actually kicking out as an error in the system because the state requires us to submit an evaluation rating for each component. We can't skip one. And so it was coming back as errors on the state reports. And so we've removed that altogether to make sure we're in compliance with the state reporting requirements. All right, moving on, talk a little bit about student achievement as part of the evaluation. So student achievement is a requirement not only for the career ladder, but also for the evaluation. We utilize the same student achievement metrics for both. And in our evaluation instrument, the student achievement is section 2 of the evaluation. The student achievement is defined as measurable student achievements targets for instructional staff, and they're defined as student success indicators for pupil personnel staff. And then growth in student achievement is, as I said, it's required of the career ladder, but also evaluation. The career ladder talks about to move from the residency compensation rung to the professional compensation rung, the employee must demonstrate that a majority or 51% of their students have met their growth targets. To move from the professional compensation rung to the advanced professional compensation rung, the employee needs to show that 75% of their students met their growth targets. Okay, so 51% to move from the residency compensation rung to the professional compensation rung, and 75% to move from the professional compensation rung to the advanced professional compensation rung. When you look at, I'm going to skip a couple slides here. Oh, never mind. I'm not going to. When you look at the evaluation instrument, there is in section 2, there is a distinguished, proficient, basic, and unsatisfactory rating associated with this. To be rated as distinguished in the student achievement section, they need to have 75% or more of their students showing growth. To be rated as proficient, they need to have at least 51% of their students showing growth. Anything below 51% should really be in the unsatisfactory category. The reason I say that is because a teacher has an opportunity to adjust this. If a teacher picked a growth measure and their students, let's say a teacher used a pre-test post-test, and they teach they give the pre-test, teach the unit, give the post-test, and they don't get 51% of their students to show growth. They need to probably reteach that, try something new, and reassess and look at submitting some other data for their growth targets. If they chose a measure, like if they have to, I don't know, basically you can adjust your measure, you can reteach and try again, reassess. That's the case for many people. As we're going to talk about here in just a minute, that's not going to be necessarily the case for everybody. But in many cases, they have an opportunity to reteach and reassess. And so teachers should have that opportunity to make that growth measure. As we've talked about in the past, we collect our student achievement data using the student growth data collection cover page. So what we ask the teacher to submit is the student growth data collection cover page. We ask them to submit a spreadsheet identifying the growth that each student made, and then, if applicable, a copy of the assessment utilized. So if I'm doing an assessment that I've created, then I'm going to provide the cover page, which shows all the information on what I was teaching, what I was assessing, the percentage of students that showed growth. Then I'm going to submit a spreadsheet that shows the pre-test, post-test, and then I'm going to submit one copy of that assessment. What we talked about yesterday in the presentation, there was a great question. What do you want, a blank copy of the assessment utilized or an actual student work sample? And I really think that depends on the assessment. If we're talking about high school and it's just a pre-test, post-test, a blank copy of the assessment is probably just fine. If it's a performance task type assessment that I'm using at the elementary level, it may be more appropriate and applicable to give me one copy of a student work sample. So it just really depends on the assessment. But we do ask that there is a copy of the assessment utilized if it's applicable. Now, if I'm using the IRI or if I'm using the ISAT or something of that nature, I'm not going to have a copy of that assessment. So in that case, I'm just going to submit the spreadsheet. So the cover page and the spreadsheet. If it's applicable, give us a copy of the assessment utilized. And I'm going to skip over. This is what it looks like on your collection on the evaluation. You can see you're going to need the content area assessed, the percentage that showed growth, and then you're going to mark whichever assessment they utilized. And then all of this information comes off of that cover sheet. Going back a slide, so these, last year, a bill was introduced and passed through the legislature. It was House Bill 222, which revised the measures used for measurable student achievement and student success indicators. I'm going to be just upfront and honest with you guys. We provided a lot of feedback on this bill. We had a lot of concerns on this bill, and we thought this bill was dead in the legislature, but it passed in the waning hours of the session. As you guys will recall, that session just kind of drug on and on and on. And this bill passed in the waning hours when everybody thought things were done. So we have some concerns about this, and but this is what the law is now. And so we're going to go through it real quickly here. What I have provided you here shows exactly what the bill language looked like. So you can see what was struck from the bill or from the statute, and you can see what is added from the statute. So the blue strike throughs, that's what was taken out of the statutory language. The red underline is what was added to the statutory language. So you can see that they've left pre-test, post-test, but they've taken that district adopted assessment, they've taken that out, and they've added to the pre-test, post-test. So they've made those one and the same. ISAT is still an option, but they've also included the interim ISAT as an option, which I know in our district we've been talking a lot about interim ISATs, and that is now an option that can be utilized by the teacher. Student learning objectives are still there. They've taken out formative assessments, and that really, I think, for the most part, if you're wanting to use a formative assessment, that could fall under that pre-test, post-test, or district adopted assessment. And then they've left teacher constructed assessment of student growth, but they've added student. They've left performance-based assessments. They've left the IRI, but as you can see, it's now a required measure for kindergarten through third grade teachers. So all of our kindergarten through third grade teachers will now be using the IRI if it's applicable. And I say if it's applicable because this is really geared towards your gen ed classroom teachers. So K through 3 gen ed classroom teachers. Your PE specialists, your music specialists, your Excel teachers, your ERR teachers, your resource room teachers, they are not going to use this measure. It's just your gen ed classroom teachers. And I did see clarification on that yesterday from the state. So your gen ed classroom teachers are going to be using the IRA. The other, some other changes, they've added the PACT to that list of college entrance exams. Again, they've deleted district adopted assessment and end of course exams. They've left advanced placement exams and career technical exams in place. And then they've added 3 things there that are tied to career technical education. And we're seeking some clarification on these too. But they've added number of business or industry certificates or credentials earned by students in an approved career technical education program, the number of students completing career technical education capstone courses, and the number of students enrolled in career technical education courses that are part of a program that culminates with business or industry certificates or credentials. So those 3 were added. Those primarily are going to impact our secondary career technical education programs only. And so we'll be working with Irene and Jason on that and making sure that we've got that figured out, how that will be implemented. Any questions on those?
Nick?
Yes.
Just as a professional courtesy to our elementary principals, could you please just very quickly walk them through when they use the IRI and they need the growth, and particularly when they're getting to the advanced rung, they need 75%?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Actually, I appreciate that reminder. So one of the things that we're seeking clarification on too is what you can utilize within that IRE. So is it only, whether the student moved from a 3 to a 2 or a 2 to a 1, or can you use those the data? And it's escaping me. What do we call the subcategories? Can you use growth in the subcategories? And we believe you're going to be able to use growth in the subcategories. And so that's going to be an important component. You may not have every kid show growth from a 2 to a 1 or a 3 to a 2, but a majority of your kids probably showed growth in some of those subcategories. And so the teacher can use those subcategories in addition to if they don't have that growth seeing from the 3 to the 2 to the 2 to the 1. So you might, for some teachers, they may be able to just use the growth of 3 to 2, 2 to 1. But if they can't, then they need to dig into those subcategories to show that the student had growth. The statute is not specific. The statute simply says Idaho Reading Indicator must be used as a measure kindergarten through 3rd grade. Since it's silent on that, and since the state board hasn't taken up and added any rules to that, that's the way we're going to proceed. We're going to utilize both. So you can use just the growth from 3 to 2 to 1, or you can use those subcategories and the growth within those subcategories to show growth as well. So Mark, I appreciate that reminder. Thank you.
Hey, Nick, it's Rebecca. Can I get clarification on that?
You bet.
Am I hearing right that, so now a K-3 teacher does not get to choose to say use a pretest post-test. They are using we're basically telling them IRI, but they can have some choice about components or how they use that.
Yeah, Rebecca, that's exactly correct. And it's not us, for clarification, it's the state legislature passed that. And so this was something that we were concerned about. Again, this bill snuck through on us. And so we're going to make the best of it. But yes, you're correct. It's now required of those K through 3 teachers. And that's how we're going to interpret it, though, is we're going to let them use those subcategories as well. Let's go. Jody's got her hand. So does Jason. So Jody, go ahead, and then we'll go to Jason.
So a quick clarification, Nick. Can they also use additional measures if they choose? They must use the IRI, but they could also use a pre-post test.
They can. The problem is in the data reporting to the state, you can only submit one measure. There isn't options to submit multiple measures. So we, in our district, we've locked down our evaluation form to only include one measure, because that's what the state requires us to submit. And when we allow multiple measures, it causes issues with the data reporting. They could certainly submit other metrics to the principal for consideration, but we can only submit the one. Jason, go ahead.
Nick, thank you. I know those last 3 items related to CTE we'll have to talk about later and clarify that. But just to make sure I understand, currently, though, those are not required of like our DTech teachers. We could still use a pre and post test as it's currently written. Is that correct?
That's correct, Jason. So these were added to the statute, but they are not, they didn't carry that same language that the IRI carried, where it says that it's a required component. Okay. You're exactly correct. Now, I will say that when it comes to these, because the statute was silent on this and the state board hasn't promulgated rules to further define this, I do believe that this can be growth from one year to the next. So if you had growth from the number of industry certificates that you issued a teacher to the next year, or it could be, did 51% of my students get an industry certificate, or 75%? So I think you could look at it either way, because the legislation didn't articulate that. But you're correct. These are not required like the IRI was. Okay. And back to Jody's question, Jody, I think it's worth us exploring with the state board on that data collection, because you're exactly right, because it does specifically say that it has to be one of the measures considered. But since they only allow us to upload one, it's kind of tying our hands a little bit. If the state board would modify that CLDS data collection system and allow for multiple measures to be uploaded, we might be able to adjust that. So I think we can look into that a little bit.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, guys, I'm going to keep rolling. We can always come back to this if there's more questions on this component. So those were the measurable student achievement targets for instructional staff. Our pupil personnel staff, so our counselors, social workers, nurses, psychologists, SLPs, OTs and PTs, audiologists, they all use student success indicators to gauge their student growth. And so the top three there, those have been in the statute since the career ladder was adopted. Those are quantifiable goals on the 504 or the IEP or the behavior intervention plan, or a school or district identified measurable student objective for a specified student group or population. We as a district came up with that third category. We met with each group. So we met with the nurses, we met with the counselors, we met with the psychs, the OTs, PTs, etc. And they came up with their indicators. And I'm going to share that document is linked later in the presentation. We can review that. The new pieces are these last two. The percentage of students who create student learning plans in grade 8 or who annually update their student learning plans thereafter. So that's an option. Theoretically, I would assume this would be utilized by counselors if they wanted to. So your junior high counselors in the development, your high school counselors in the updating of them, they can utilize it. That's not a required measure for those folks, but it is a new option. This one is a required measure for the applicable staff, and I have a lot of questions about how this gets implemented and don't have answers for you. But the percentage of students who satisfactorily complete one or more advanced opportunities options as identified in section 334602 Idaho Code, or who earn business or industry certificates or credentials. My assumption is this is going to be utilized by counselors at the high school level, but I don't know that to be certain because I'm not sure who the applicable staff really is on this. So we're going to seek some clarification on that. My theory is that it's probably the counselors that are helping students choose classes or something of that nature. We don't know, and so we're going to seek some clarification on that one. Any questions on those? Okay. Again, this is how, this is what the data collection looks like on those pupil personnel evaluations. Again, content area assessed, percentage of students that showed growth, and then you check one of those boxes. This is developed to help us report the data to the state. And that's why, again, we can only check one of these boxes because they only let us provide one. And if we try to provide more, it creates a data reporting error in the state report. So. And just as a quick reminder, if an employee does not submit evidence of student achievement, they would be rated as unsatisfactory in section 2 of the evaluation, and that would result in an unsatisfactory overall on the evaluation. Again, that's just a reminder. That's not a great group of people. It's usually people who are retiring that choose not to submit that stuff. My guess is, though, is once we make them aware of this, that 1% will cure itself and they'll get something submitted. Collection of leadership role. Now, I want to make something clear about the collection of leadership positions. This is collected on our evaluation form, but it is not a component of the evaluation. So if a teacher doesn't have a leadership position, it has no negative impact on their evaluation. We're simply using the evaluation form to collect the information because that it's all part of what gets uploaded to the state along with the evaluation results. So again, to move from the professional compensation rung to the advanced professional compensation rung, you have to have served in a leadership capacity in the building or the district. They've given us some examples of what that can be: instructional specialist or instructional coach, a mentor, curriculum or assessment committee member, team or committee leadership position, data coach, or other leadership positions identified by the district. And we have identified those positions. There's a document that I have a link to here later in the presentation where you can go and see all of the leadership positions that the district has approved to count for this leadership role. It is not an exhaustive list. Last year, that list was updated and added to several times as principals reached out to me and said, hey, I've got a teacher serving in this capacity. Would this count as a leadership role? And I said, you know what? That's not on the list. Let me take that to the cabinet and get back to you. The cabinet approved it. We added it to the list, and you were able to grant leadership to the teacher for that role. If you have that occurrence, if you've got a teacher who's working in a leadership position that is not on that list, simply reach out and we'll see if that will qualify. Again, I just want to reiterate, if they're not in a leadership position, it has no negative impact on their evaluation. We're just using the evaluation instrument to collect the data. The other thing I want to make sure people understand is that this is a requirement to move from the professional compensation rung to the advanced compensation rung. It is not a requirement that they continue to serve in leadership positions to stay on the advanced compensation rung. Advanced professional compensation rung. So they need it to get onto the rung, but they don't have to continue forever in leadership positions to stay there. We sought that clarification. Nancy reached out to the state last year to get that clarification. This is what that leadership collection looks like. You click yes, you click the option. If you click other, you do have to provide you type in the response of what that role was. And then linked here, these are the examples of the leadership positions. And I'm going to toggle over to a new screen here and just show you that real quick. So this is the document that we put together with the leadership positions that have been approved. As you can see, there's a lot that we have on here. So you'll want to take a look at that and be aware of that. Share that with your teachers. Let them know what leadership positions count. But again, it's not an exhaustive list. And if you have a teacher that's serving in some other leadership role that we hadn't thought of, just reach out and we'll review it and consider adding it. All right, back to my presentation. All right. And then the professional learning plan, as we've kind of talked about already, the PLP is required for the career ladder, and we are also utilizing it as the additional measure, a professional practice measure on our evaluation. So in administrative rule, they require an additional measure of professional practice as part of the evaluation. Your options on that are parental input, student input, or a portfolio, including PLPs. We used to, for those of you that have been around for a while, we used to utilize parental input. And through the audit process, the state came back after a few years and said, you know what, if you're going to use parental input, it needs to be individual teacher parental input. So we would have to survey parents on each individual teacher. There were a lot of concerns around that for the district. One was, if you have a student at the high school, is a parent really going to fill out 6 different surveys for 6 different teachers? They probably aren't, unless it's a teacher that they don't care for. And at the elementary level, are you really going to get surveys back for the PE teacher and the music teacher and the reading specialist and the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? You're probably only going to get them back for the gen ed classroom teacher. And so when the state made us move to individual parental input surveys, we decided to make a shift at that time and start utilizing the PLP as that portfolio that's required. And so now the PLP is a required component to move on the career ladder, but also a required component of our evaluation. This is what it looks like on the evaluation form. You simply click yes or no, and you can provide comments. The PLP form is linked there, and it's also linked on the staff intranet. It's also linked in the administrator HR site that we're going to review later. As a reminder, again, if an employee does not submit a PLP, they would be rated as unsatisfactory in their Section 1 rating, since a PLP is a required component of the evaluation. And that would result in that unsatisfactory overall on the evaluation. So if they don't submit a PLP, they're unsatisfactory in Section 1, they're unsatisfactory overall. Now, in practice, my guess is if you have a teacher that doesn't submit it, and you have to rate them as unsatisfactory in Section 1 and in the overall evaluation, then they're probably going to get that PLP put together for you and get one submitted. And hopefully they already had one going and just chose not to submit it to you. But I think we're going to want to be proactive and make sure our teachers understand the requirement. Because again, the only place we've really seen this in the past has been in folks that are getting ready to retire and they just don't think they have to do it. So we'll want to educate people on the front end. One of the questions that came up yesterday was a great question. A lot of times you may complete the evaluation before the PLP is actually completed. The end of the PLP, they haven't finished that process, and that reflection piece isn't completed. If they submit a PLP to you and it's just not completed yet, they haven't done that final reflection or they haven't done that final review, then you can go ahead and mark it off if you believe that they're going to finish it. If you don't believe they're going to finish it, you might simply mark that it's not there, forwarded the evaluation for their post-conference, because you only have 7 days or 5 days to get that to them. They're going to return that to you for the post-conference. If you remember the workflow in Winocular, and Tony's going to kind of talk about this a little bit later, but the workflow, you submit it to them for review, they submit it back to you in Winocular for the post-conference, then you finalize it, can make changes, and send it back to them for signature. That's at that point where you get to make changes before you send it back to signature. If you need to sit on that evaluation until they get the PLP, that's fine. You can sit on that evaluation. You've already met the requirements that are required in the master contract. And if you need to sit on it while they wait to get their PLP completed, that's totally fine. There's a question here from Julianne. Does the PLP have to be directly tied to assessment data? If so, can I get an example of this for elementary? I want to make sure I have been doing this correctly. So the PLP is not about the student growth. It's about the employee's professional practice and their growth. So it may be tied to student achievement, but it may not be tied to student achievement necessarily. It may be tied to something completely different that the employee is working to grow and develop professionally. So there are a number of examples of PLPs that are out there on the staff intranet, and I believe maybe even linked in the administrator HR site. But I know on the staff intranet we have a number of examples out there that you can look at. All right. Any questions on PLPs before I move on? Okay. Keep rolling. Just a couple reminders on unsatisfactory marks and evaluation. If an evaluation area may be marked unsatisfactory in response to a single incident if it produces a high level of concern or a significant disruption to the workplace. So you may have a single incident that results in you rating a teacher unsatisfactory, or it can be performance that you've observed throughout the entire year, okay? Unsatisfactory marks may also result if an area of concern is persistent over time. Like I said, if you've seen it throughout the whole school year, you may rate them unsatisfactory as well. An important thing to clarify, because I get this question every year, is does a basic ranking have to precede an unsatisfactory ranking? So if they were proficient last year in domain 4B, can I go from proficient last year or distinguished last year to unsatisfactory? And the answer is yes. You don't have to, it does not have to be preceded by a basic before you can go to unsatisfactory. Again, if there's a single incident or you see behavior over the course of the school year, it may result in an unsatisfactory, even if they were distinguished or proficient the year before. And then an employee may have some basics and still be ranked proficient overall. Our new to profession teachers, it's very appropriate for them to be rated basic in many components. as a brand new teacher, you haven't mastered your craft, and it's a growth process. And so it's very appropriate to be rated basic in some components and still be proficient overall in your evaluation. And then one component, as a reminder, one component marked as unsatisfactory on the evaluation does result in an overall unsatisfactory evaluation in the summary, okay? And then components marked as basic or unsatisfactory, we do ask that you give written comments and data and or evidence to support those decisions. The teacher needs to know why they were rated unsatisfactory or basic. You need to provide them with that evidence and substantiate those markings. So be sure if you're rating anybody basic or unsatisfactory, there should be comments in those comment boxes to support that. And then it's important to inform the employee of deficiencies and to document when you give them notice. That also is powerful evidence when you're completing that evaluation. If you're in the comment box able to identify the dates that you talk to them about their issues, or the date that you sent them an email with a concern or a coaching memo or a letter of warning, documenting the dates and those events is really important. Any questions on those? All right, just one other little change on the evaluations. Social worker evaluation instruments were modified this last year to remove component 3C. That component talked about the social workers participating in problem-solving intervention team meetings, and it was brought to our attention from Tamara Venegas and the social workers that they don't typically participate in those PSIT meetings, and so they had asked for that component to be removed, so we have removed that. And then just as a reminder, we have two different observation forms that you will utilize when you're evaluating or observing certificated staff. There is the instructional staff observation form, and then there is this other non-teacher observation form. This is to be used for counselors, media specialists, nurses, OTs, PTs, psychologists, SLPs, and social workers. And it lists the 4 domains, and it has one comment box and then a place for your name. This is the form you will use for this group listed over here on the side. Your teachers will all use the teacher instructional observation form. All right, moving on. We're moving along here. State board audit. So some of you on this call are part of the audit that is currently going on. You recently received information and are working to provide me with all of the documentation for that audit. Some of you may have been audited in the past, but State Statute 33-1004B does require that the State Board of Education audit a cross-section of evaluators statewide every year. That audit has been a little inconsistent. Some years we get the audit in the spring. Some years we've gotten the audit in the summer. Right now we just got it here, at the start of this year. So it's been kind of all over the place. But what we do is ask you to maintain the evidence used to inform your teacher evaluation for those audit purposes. So you must keep documentation of your student achievement. So you're going to keep a copy of that student achievement cover page, the spreadsheet, the assessment, if that was applicable. You're going to keep a copy of the PLP. And then we ask that you keep some evidence of the leadership positions, although that was not something that we needed to provide this year for the audit. And then this documentation will be requested by HR. You're going to send all of that to me. So for example, if Amy Pinkerman gets selected for the audit, Amy's going to, the state will say, Susie Smith, Bill Jones, and Mac Brown were selected. Those are the 3 teachers that Amy Pinkerman observed, and those 3 teachers are who have been selected as part of the audit. I send those names to Amy. Amy provides me all of the documentation for those 3 teachers. I take that, combine it with the evaluation and the observation form, upload it as a single document to the state website, and we're good. The question came yesterday is, what format do I prefer that in? Really, I don't have a preference. I do have to turn it into a PDF, So if you want to store them as PDFs in a Google folder, that's great. If you want to keep hard copies and send me hard copies, I can scan them to PDFs, not a problem at all. Whatever works for you. So keep them hard copy, keep them electronic, whatever you prefer. Any questions on that state board audit? By this time, we've been doing this long enough that a majority of you have lived through one of these audits probably, and they're really not too bad. The results, our audit results for our district have been really good. We usually are used as a model for when they're showing what a submission should look like. So that makes me really proud of you guys for the work you've done and the documentation you've collected. I sit on those audit review committees. I'm part of the committee that reviews the statewide audits, and I can't review ours, obviously, and I can't review materials from other Region 3 schools, but I review for Region 4, 5, 6, 1, and 2. And we really do a good job. You really do a good job as principals of documenting all of that information and making sure you're holding on to it. So really appreciate your guys' work on that. A couple frequently asked questions. Must all walkthrough feedback be documented on the certified observation form? And the answer is no. You do have to have that one formal observation documentation that we add to Binocular, but you can be in that classroom, and you should be in that classroom all the time for walkthroughs and visits. You don't have to document each one of those formally on an observation form. You might just write them a little note. You might send them an email. You might not do anything. You might just walk in and observe what's going on. But you do have to have that one observation that is completed on the district observation form in Binocular. And then must all observation walkthroughs be sent to the personnel file? Again, no, just that one that's on the formal form. And do I have to mark or comment on every domain or component on the certified observation form? And the answer is no. If you are in that classroom, your 30 minutes passes and you don't see any evidence of domain 1 or 4, that's not going to be surprising. You may not see every time stuff from 1 or 4. So you may not provide comments on domain 4 on that observation form. If you do, great. If you don't, you don't. It's whatever you've observed. So you don't have to write comments in every one of those boxes on that observation form. And then do I have to schedule a post-conference with the employee to review the official observation document that will be sent to the personnel file? And the answer is no. Remember, you have to have a post-conference for the evaluation, but you don't have to have a post-conference for the observation. Now, if you're going to rate somebody or write some comments that are concerns, you have some concerns, I would highly encourage you to obviously have a conversation with that teacher. Don't just submit the form and be done with it. Have that conversation with the employee about the concerns you observed in the classroom as part of that observation. And then, can I send more than one observation document to the personnel file? The answer is yes, you absolutely can. You just have to make sure that at least one of them was submitted prior to that January 1st deadline. And then, can data from observations be included or referenced on the formal evaluation? The answer is yes. Not only yes, but it should be. That formal evaluation should be summative. It should reflect what you observed in the first observation, what you observed in the second observation, and then what you've observed that employee doing throughout the entire year. And then, how many formal evaluations do I have to do for each certified employee? The answer is 1 by June 1st. You can do more. One thing I do like to remind people, if you do multiple evaluations on an employee in a year, let's say they're on intensive staff development, we only have an option to upload the last evaluation you conducted. And so the last one you conducted is the one that gets uploaded. One of the limitations of the state reporting. Here's just a few resources for you. I've added these online resources because we've got folks online now, but we also have these general resources. This Look For and Listen For Danielson Domains is a great document that I've utilized in the past. Basically, if you're trying to figure out what you should be looking for in the classroom to rate a teacher proficient versus distinguished, this document has a lot of good guidance on what that proficient teacher looks like in each domain and component, and what that distinguished teacher looks like in each domain and component. So that's a good document. I encourage you to check that out. Again, here's a link for the leadership positions acceptable for advancement on the career ladder. All of these documents listed here and linked here are also on that HR Administrator Google site that we will review later as well. This is the point in the presentation where I would have taken a break, and you guys would use the restroom and get a snack, and then we would be coming back to watch 2 teacher videos and actually rate those teacher videos, and then have some conversation and dialogue around what we saw. And we were going to work on building some inter-rater reliability across the district. Like I said, when we made the decision on Tuesday to move this virtual, because we couldn't get a larger room, and with COVID and everything you guys are dealing with as building principals, we just decided it was better to do it virtually. We decided to not do this year, but we do hope to add this feature next year to next year's training. So hopefully we'll all be able to be in person next year. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Tony Day, and he is going to walk you guys through the certified observation and evaluation forms, and walk you through going into Winocular and actually assigning some observation and evaluation forms. And this is just a good refresher for those of you that are veterans. It's always nice to have that refresher. And for those of you that are new, these 2 guides and what Tony showed you are going to be really valuable. So I'm going to turn it over to Tony, and if there are any questions, just let us know.
Thanks, Nick. So before I start broadcasting my screen, I'd just like to point out that on Nick's slide there, he has links to the guides, that they're documents that Brent had put together previously that walk you step by step through this process. And I think you'll see that it's pretty simple as I show it to you. So I'm going to present my screen. Okay, so I am actually impersonating the Winocular account of Joan Bigelow, principal at Grace Jordan, just because my access looks a little different than all of yours. But in order to view your staff list, in order to assign evaluations, you're going to go through employee query. And in here, you could look up an individual employee by their name. But when you're doing evaluations, you probably want to access all of them or a lot of them. So what we're going to do is go to Saved Queries in the top right corner. And in here, you have access to 3 different queries to pull up your classified employees at your site, your certified employees at your site. And then we have a new feature here to pull up ancillary employees at your site. This actually came up as a result of a concern brought to us by Diana Molino. So thank you, Diana, for bringing this to our attention. But there's some employee types that don't quite fall under certified and classified that could come to your school or could be working at your school. Like an example would be a walk-on coach, someone who's kind of in a different category. So you have this new feature, and I'll show you what this looks like here real quick. In this case, Joan at Grace Jordan has 3 people show up on here, and actually all 3 of these are also these people are gonna show up in their certified list as well, because they're teachers who have just in the past been something, an ancillary employee. So if you do see someone on your list who doesn't look like it's quite in place there, you're welcome to check in with us. We can move these folks out of the ancillary status. It's really just a checkbox that we sometimes gets doesn't get deselected. So it's really at the junior high and high school level that you're going to see a larger list of ancillary employees. But let's go back here. So we're going to assign some certified evaluations. So we'll do the certified employee query. And then in here, you can see a list of all of the certified employees. It's 2 pages long. And you can, if you want to assign them to everyone, you can click Mark All, and that's going to check everyone applicable there. You could also go through, if you wanted to just do certain evaluations, you can just go through and select a couple. And once you've got the folks selected, you're going to click Assign Smart Form here in the bottom right. And in this case, we're going to do a teacher evaluation. And then you would just click Assign. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to mess up Joan's process here. But what I do have is a fake account that It's an employee called Ray Homer, and so I've got him pulled up on Nick's Winocular. So when you have a evaluation assigned, once you've assigned that smart form, it pops into your workflow on the main page. So you can see here we have evaluate employee for Ray Homer. So you'd have one of these for each of your employees that you had assigned that smart form. So if we click on it, you can see that the area marked in red here is the step that needs to be completed next. We need to actually complete the evaluation. So right now, only I have access to view it. And so we click in here and we just want to start completing the evaluation. So fill out what their assignment is, their school, and it's going to automatically place all of the checkboxes on proficient, but just go through and mark it as appropriate. Ray's, he struggles a lot, but so you can write in comments, continue on, mark through all the areas in the evaluation. So we get down here. I do want to just point out again in this section 2 where we're doing the percentage of students demonstrating growth, make sure that it is a whole number entered between 1 and 100. Don't put the percentage marker at, we found that actually causes our reporting to kick back to us. So just put in a number there. So when you've completed the evaluation, typed in all your comments, you can click complete, or if you need to stop and work on it again later, you click save for later. So it's not going to let me do it because I haven't completed all the areas that I'm supposed to. But once you complete it, it ends up sending it, routing it right over to Ray, where he has 5 calendar days to review the evaluation and then sign off on it and send it back to you for finalization. They can at that time also write a rebuttal if they wish to, and that rebuttal, it's not a grievance, but they are able to rebut and give their side of if they disagree with any of the items on the evaluation. So then once they've signed off on it within those 5 days, it routes back to you, and you would then finalize it. So if the employee does not do their part in those 5 days, it's automatically sent in and finalized. So Nick, did I miss anything there?
I think that's great.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? Okay, Jason says if we have staff members misplaced in the ancillary certified or classified categories who don't belong to our school, who should we email to have them adjusted or removed? Go ahead and email me and we can take a look at it. It doesn't hurt anything to have someone in the ancillary section who doesn't belong there, as long as they're also showing up in the correct section, the certified or classified. If someone's showing up on your list who doesn't belong to your school, we definitely want to take a look at that. This ancillary feature is new, and there are some kinks we still need to work out. So definitely do let us know if you see something that's incorrect. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm going to kick it back to Nick to continue the presentation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it. All right. We're going to keep rolling into the progressive discipline and due process. We are getting closer to being done, so keep bearing with us, hang with us here. So when we talk about staff misconduct and our progressive discipline process in the district, we do have a progressive approach to staff discipline as outlined in the document link there. This document is available to you on the HR administrator website as well. It just walks you step by step through the information I'm going to share with you now. It's just a one-stop shop for it instead of the whole PowerPoint. So each step increases in the level of concern. And as you would imagine, depending on the incident, depending on the severity of the incident, you may jump to other levels. But The progressive process is verbal warning, email or coaching memo, letter of concern or warning, and letter of reprimand. And we're going to talk about each of those individually. So the first one would be a verbal warning. This would be a conference with the employee to identify your concern. You're going to validate your information. So you've had something brought to your attention, or you've witnessed something that you feel like a verbal warning is an appropriate level of addressing the concern. You're going to have that conversation with them, and then you're going to follow it up with an email identifying the date of the incident, date of your conversation with them, the outcome, and what you expect to see. We always encourage you to follow up with an email just to make sure that everybody is on the same page. If it's a situation that you feel you need an additional administrator with you, for those of you that have an assistant principal, it never hurts to have that conversation with another set of ears. If you don't have an assistant principal in your building, and you still feel like somebody needs to be present, you could reach out to me, reach out to your area director, and have that conversation with us, and we'd be able to support you in that effort. The next level would be an email or coaching memo. This could be standalone, or it could just be the follow-up to your verbal conversation, but these are for lower level concerns. They can be addressed through an email or a coaching memo, and the coaching memo is something a little bit new to many of you. That's something that Tony and Katie have brought over to us from their work in facilities and operations, and it's a great format for coaching an individual up on what you'd like to see them improve in. And then I think the important thing to keep in mind that these are for lower level concerns. It's not yet risen to a level of letter of warning, and certainly not the level of reprimand, but something you want the employee to improve on. That coaching memo, and I'm going to actually click on it and show you what that looks like. I'm going to share a different screen with you. Maybe. Yep. So this is just a template of the coaching memo, and it just kind of walks you through what was observed, the expectations, the follow-up, and signed by both parties. And you, as a supervisor, can make the decision to add this to the employee's personnel file or not. That would be your decision and at your discretion. Whereas with a letter of warning and a letter of reprimand, those must be added to the personnel file. Okay, I'm going to switch back over. All right. The next level is the letter of concern or warning. I think we title these letter of warning, but historically they've been called either letter of concern or warning. This is a formal document stating what the issue is, when it took place, who was involved, what effect it had on the workplace, what you expect to see done differently next time, and other relevant points. If it's a serious issue, you should call your area director and get their advice on whether or not it's a letter of warning or should it be a letter of reprimand. And they can help kind of guide you in that decision-making process. The letter of warning is issued and presented by the building principal, but you can work with me directly to draft that letter. I've got a lot of sample letters and can just help you put that together. So just reach out to me if you're going to be issuing a letter of warning, and I can help you get that pulled together. Again, just as a reminder, those letters of warning are to be placed in the personnel file. So once you've issued it to the employee and they have signed it, you would send a copy of that to HR, to me, or Tony to add to that personnel file. And then letters of reprimand, these are written and presented by the area director, and they outline your concerns. So you're going to work directly with your area director in the drafting of this to make sure that they have all of the correct and pertinent information. And then they are the actual ones that meet with the employee. You will attend that meeting, but they meet with the employee and issue that letter of reprimand. The employee is absolutely welcome to invite the BEA if they deem it necessary. That could include Stephanie, or it could include a building rep. at their discretion. And the employee needs to be provided a copy of that reprimand 24 hours prior to them being presented with that reprimand. And usually the area director will take care of that, but they may work through you to get that to the employee depending on the circumstances. But it does need to be given to the employee 24 hours in advance notice so they have time to review it and they have time to contact the BEA if they want to. And again, as a reminder, letters of reprimand are always placed in the personnel file. Any questions on those? Okay, going to keep rolling. A progressive approach to an unsatisfactory evaluation. So we've talked a little bit about this. Evaluations with unsatisfactory marks, they would typically be followed by a professional improvement plan, and which would be part of that intensive staff development period. So you're going to put together a plan and working with your director, put together an intensive staff development plan. They're going to be on that plan for 6 weeks. At the end of that 6-week period, in most cases, you're going to reevaluate the employee and determine make a determination at that time. You may choose to repeat another 6-week intensive staff development period. You may choose to move into the 8-week probationary period, or if they've improved, you may take them off that intensive staff development plan. Okay, and then as a reminder, the intensive staff development period is 6 weeks. The probationary period is 8 weeks. And then if the employee still hasn't shown improvement, we would move into the dismissal process, which involves a formal board hearing, and that takes some time to get scheduled and to work through. As you can see, you're dealing with 14 weeks at a minimum, but more likely talking about 15, 16 weeks for this entire process to work through. If you are waiting to evaluate your employees in the end of May, we aren't going to get through intensive staff, probation, and dismissal hearings before their contract renews. So if you're waiting late in the year to evaluate an employee that you have concerns about, you're most likely going to be working with that employee the following year on those plans. So if I evaluate somebody in like May 15th, and I've only got 2 weeks of school left, I may put them on intensive staff development for those 2 weeks, but they've got 4 more weeks in the following school year of intensive staff development. So they'll start the new school year on intensive staff development. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're doing your evaluations. Keep that timeline in mind. If you've got an employee that you're concerned about, don't wait till the end to do that evaluation. Any questions on that? Okay. A couple points to remember. The conversations with employees when they're struggling and when there's misconduct, they can be very, very difficult. I always encourage you to prepare an outline of your important points so you don't forget something. You don't need to script out necessarily what you're going to say, but just a brief outline of the points you want to touch on. When you get in these meetings, it's totally reasonable and understandable that you might be nervous. It's reasonable and understandable that the meeting may not go in the direction you hope it goes. And so having an outline of the important points you want to talk about is a good strategy to make sure you touch on everything you intend to touch on. Always encourage you guys to be professional, respectful, and don't let your emotions take over. It's very understandable and reasonable that the employee you're talking to may be emotional. Just don't go down that rabbit hole with them. Stick to the facts. Do not make comments or solicit reasons for their behaviors, and allow the employee to share their thoughts and tell their story. There may be a very good reason behind what's going on and what you're observing. Go ahead and let them tell that story, but don't solicit reasons for the behaviors. And then just a few other things. You're the manager of the meeting. You're in control. You're going to drive the meeting. You're calling the shots in it. Okay. It's not uncommon, again, for the employee to struggle with the correction. Be prepared for a number of different emotions and responses. And then if you need some assistance, don't hesitate to contact your peers, contact Tony and I in HR or your director to help you prepare for that conference. Many of you, I've worked with many of you as you've prepared for a difficult meeting with a teacher, and we walk through what are your points that you plan on making, how are you going to phrase that, what are you going to say, and I can help you walk through that and prepare for that meeting. I'm always happy to do that and help you prepare for that difficult meeting. And then I always encourage you too to work with the BEA as needed. Stephanie is a great resource for us and can help us have some of those difficult conversations and can help us work with the employee to improve. So the BEA is our partner in this, and we really appreciate the assistance they lend us in some of these difficult conversations. So don't hesitate to reach out to the BEA when needed. All right, we're really, really close to being done. Principal administrator recertification requirements. So most of you on this call have been administrators for a long time. You have had to go through the process of recertifying. One of the recertification requirements that's been on the books for quite a while now is that out of the 6 credits that you have to get every 5 years, 3 of those credits have to be in teacher evaluation. They have to be in the Idaho framework for teacher evaluation. They have to include a laboratory component, and that's required each recertification cycle. Every one of our higher education institutions has a class that they offer, and we as a district also have our own class that Mark Jones facilitates. You can find a full listing of the courses that are on this website. So if you click on the State Board of Education approved courses, our course is on there, but so are all the other courses across the state. If you're in a position, let's say you're working on your ed specialist, you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and you could take a course from the university as an elective and also fulfill those requirements. Just keep that in mind if you're working on additional degrees. Our course, the course overview, is linked here in the PowerPoint, and you can take a look at that. Our course is through Educational Impact, which is an online PD delivery company that we've partnered with, and the credits, I believe, are through NNU, and so that's one option you have. But again, there are many options out there. Any questions on that recertification requirement? Like I said, many of you have been there, done that, but just a reminder. All right, we are almost there. The last thing I want to walk you through is that administrator HR site. This is just a reminder. We've shared this with you guys in the past. For those of you that are new, this is a really great resource, basically a one-stop shop for everything you need related to HR. So I'm going to share a new screen with you. And this is the site, the HR administrator site. And I'm just going to draw your attention to a few things. I would encourage you to kind of spend some time going through this on your own just to see everything that's provided in here. But today I'm going to point out the observation and evaluation section. And so those 2 guides that we referenced, that Tony referenced earlier, they're right here. So if you ever need to reference those guides when you're trying to do an evaluation or trying to do an observation, this is the spot, okay? The presentation that I just shared with you is linked right here, 2021-22 Contract Evaluation and Due Process PowerPoint. I've got the professional learning plan templates. They're linked right here. Those are also available on the staff intranet, so your staff can go out there and get those on their own, or you can use these and share them with them. There's a Word version and a PDF version of those PLPs. The student growth data collection cover page that we referenced is right here. The student success indicators for pupil personnel certificate holders is right here. That look for and listen for Danielson framework document is here, and several other Danielson framework guides are here. The seniority reports, you can go look at your seniority reports when we get to the end of the year and we find ourselves in a position where we need to reduce a position in a school. Those seniority reports guide us in that. So the last hired, first to be moved kind of situation. And then, as a reminder, classified evaluation guide and forms are here as well. The classified evaluation is also in Winocular, and we would encourage you to use the Winocular one. But if you prefer to use the Google version or the Word version or the PDF, They're here. You're welcome to use those when completing those. If you complete your classified evaluations using one of those forms, you just need to remember to send those into HR so we can scan them to the employee's personnel file. And then I haven't updated these yet, but we do provide PDFs of all of our evaluation instruments in here. You often will get questions from your staff who are taking in a master's program or an ed specialist program. They'll say, hey, do we have a PDF of our evaluation instrument? I need it for a class. This is where you can find that. These have not been updated with this year's instruments, but I hope to get that done. I was hoping to do it yesterday, didn't get it done, so hoping to get it done today or very soon. We'll get those updated with this year's instrument, but those are there for you. Some of you like to use those when you're training your teachers on what to expect from the evaluation. So those are there for you as a resource. Another thing I want to point out in here, one of them is who to contact in HR. I forgot to point this out to the principals and administrators yesterday, but we have a document in here that basically lists every topic we deal with in HR and who to contact if you have a question on it. So if you're not sure who to contact about benefit changes related to family status change, there it is. Robbie Hawthorne is who you can contact. If you're not sure to contact about posting a classified job, there you go. It's Ginny Anderson if it's a school-based classified. So this is a really valuable guide for you in helping you figure out who to contact. The other thing I want to point out to you guys is under district employment. This is where all of that due process and discipline data is. So you can see the presentation from today is here as well. That progressive discipline document is in here. Intensive staff development document is here. We have a link to the peer assistance website. So if you have an employee that you're putting on intensive staff and you want them to have a peer assistant, this is where you can go to get all that information and contact our peer assistants for help. We also have sample letters of warnings, reprimands. The coaching template is all in here. Again, just as a resource. We've got contracts for your calendar, your contract calendar linked in there. Yeah, a lot of good stuff in here that I encourage you to spend some time taking a look at. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up and see if there are any questions.
One thing I'd like to add really quick, Nick, is that we also put a link to every memo HR sends out on the administrator HR site. So if you're curious about any memos we may have sent out that apply to more than just a couple employees, it's going to be listed right on there. And we've got an archive of the last 3 years worth as well.
Thank you for that reminder, Tony. I really appreciate that. Yep. And here you guys can see that. So that's under Human Resources. And here's current year's memos. They're all there. And so Tony and Katie do a really nice job of making sure every time we send something out that it gets added here. And like he said, you got many years you can go back and look. So thank you, Tony. Any other questions? All right. Well, you know who to contact if you have questions. Don't hesitate to reach out to Tony or I. We're happy to assist you guys in any way we can. Or if something pops up later and you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out. I hope you guys have a great Friday and a great rest of the school year. Talk to you soon.